During 2017, I participated in an innovative rehabilitation program for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I came away with an unintended, remarkable body of painting works and greatly improved quality of life. My background as an artist, creative arts therapist and medical scientist enabled me to invite my treating practitioners and colleagues to come together in fostering education and conversation about the sensitised central nervous system and my recovery. Here is one of several offerings.
The first presenter will be Dr. Paul Noone, and before he begins, I'd just like to give you a bit of a snapshot of Paul's background. Paul graduated as a chiropractor around 34 years ago and is in practice in Hampton. He lives and works with his wife Joan, has raised 6 kids, which is a thing. And in between times, Paul and Joan moved to Ireland for 10 years. And that's where they completed some studies in traditional Chinese medicine. Paul also completed a PhD in complementary health studies at the University of Exeter and additional postgraduate studies in clinical neuroscience. Since returning to Melbourne in 1999, Paul has been running a complex case practice. Paul lectures also extensively and is currently part of a clinical research team investigating the outcomes in functional neurorehabilitation. So Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll turn this guy on. Just as an introduction, how I met Victoria was, which we'll go through in a little bit, but basically how this whole thing probably came about is early on in the piece I was asked by Victoria whether she could do some art making whilst undertaking a rehab program I was developing with her in late 2016. And she felt she needed to do something purposeful with herself in the extreme condition she was in at the time. And she wanted to make it enjoyable as well. So she preferred, when she said to me that she wanted to do 3D sort of art making and so on, and I'll explain why my response suggested that that was just way too complex for what I wanted her to do. I wanted to do sort of 2D work. I wanted it number and counting focused, very specifically, for a reason which we'll go through. And I said to her, out of the blue, because I'm such a poor art person myself, what about colouring by numbers? And she did, and here we are. So I'm going to explain to you why I suggested this to her, so the remainder of this 45 minutes. A few pre-presentation administration issues. The last time I presented this work was at a biomedical engineering conference in Denver. 2 engineers who are getting a laugh out of them is really interesting, but anyway. So I'm a reference sort of guy. Every time I present, I have to have references. I reference my work to within an inch of its life. And every time you see this PubMed little sign or insignia on a slide, that means there's a lot of references, but I'm not going to talk to you about those references. But just for my own satisfaction, I need you to know there's a lot of references to it. I'm not a reflection guy, but here we are. Victoria said you need to reflect, and I thought, well, I don't know what that means, but anyway. So every time you see Rodin here, that means I've reflected. Okay, so we'll go through those slides and we'll see how we go. I have, it's forced me to reflect on a lot of things. Text orientation, there's horizontal and vertical, you'll see. So for all of those of you who are pretty good at reading up and down, you've got much higher frontal lobe capacity. So the rest of you, just do it and that'll increase it anyway. So you'll see a bit of that happening. A couple of other things. When Victoria edited this presentation, she suggested maybe in the audience there'll be a mix. There'll be people who'll know about the central nervous system and nervous system and so on. There'll be people who won't. So we'll orientate ourselves here. When I say the central nervous system, I mean the brain, just here. When I say right and left hemisphere, this is the type of thing we're talking about. This guy's looking at us. So this is his right side, this is his left side. The central nervous system involves the brain stem, very, very important, and the spinal cord. And all the nerves outside the spinal cord are the peripheral nervous system. We're going to be talking about central nervous system sensitization, and that's what a lot of the talk will be about. That brain there actually is heavily involved in the voluntary nervous system. So that controls the planned motor functions that you experience, the things you're thinking about, thinking, moving from one place to another, planning, contemplation, design, and so on. Multitasking. This is the high human function that we have. The autonomic nervous system, which we'll talk a little bit about through the lecture, is the part of your nervous system that operates at automatic level. Your heart rate, your respiration rate, your postural control mechanisms when you're standing, moving, walking around, the ability for you to actually move and do things without thinking, your gut, your digestion, and so on. All those things that you don't have to allocate any of your frontal lobe capacity to. It's just done for you, okay? And we'll talk about what was happening with Victoria. Okay, and the reason we have this is so it basically supplies what we need for us, which is oxygen, fuel, and activation to a degree. We need to be able to move around and we need to actually have that. And of course the biological theory is that we do it to pass on our genes to the next generation, but that may be that's up to debate, I suppose. Okay. The autonomic nervous system is broken into two things very quickly. The sympathetic, which is fight and flight. What you do if someone's coming at you, you're going to run away. And you're going to run away quickly. No use sitting around thinking about things, talking about the contemplations of life. We're out of here. Okay? So threat, whether it's real or perceived. Real or perceived. Okay? With that, people in a state of heightened threat have a heightened perception awareness. So they are in a sensory perception, very aware of everything. Okay? Think about the fact that you're walking through a haunted house in the dark and you hear noises, you see things and so on. You're in a heightened state. Okay? With that, you'll have your heart rate up, you'll have your blood pressure going, breathing rate up, shut down blood to gut, increase blood to muscles, and so on. So you can imagine what you need to be in that state to get away. As opposed to that, we have our parasympathetic system, which is very much involved in rest and recovery and repair. So it slows down the heart rate, it slows down blood pressure, just gives us time to sit. So there's a very good anatomy book called Last. I don't know if you remember that, Victoria. Okay, he gave a great description of the two, but the parasympathetic nervous system is, imagine if you are sitting on the toilet and you're planning to evacuate things and you're just quietly sitting there thinking about life. That basically is giving you your parasympathetic system.
Paul, can I just, sorry. If you don't mind.
Go for it.
In relation to the sympathetic nervous system, I just wanted to add, because I think it'll be relevant later on, at its most extreme, and in my case, the fight and flight response can become a freeze response.
Yes, we'll be talking about that.
Yeah, okay, great.
Are you going to interrupt again?
I'll try not to.
This is not about you. I don't know where you got that idea. Okay. And lastly, when we talk about brain maps, okay, where were we, Victoria? Okay. When we talk about brain maps, we have maps on our brain for a whole lot of things. This is how the brain of a normal person perceives the feelings and sensory interactions of the surface of your body. Okay, this is called the homunculus. So we have a very big awareness of our face, our mouth, our tongue, our teeth, our feet, our hands, and very small awareness of our trunk and back. There are visual maps, hand maps, there's a whole range of maps. That's been one of the biggest areas of discovery in neuroscience in the last 20 years. And to a degree, we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's about it. Okay. The last thing was in 1990, the United States Congress added or allocated billions of dollars to research to the following decade, which it does every decade, to some sort of health problem. And it allocated in 1990 billions to the decade of the brain. So the majority of the information that you're seeing, those of you who are in the lay area here, those of you in medicine and so on, has come out of that decade. Okay, so, and it was an interesting time, and it has spawned just the most amazing amount of information and research. My mentor, we'll talk about very quickly in a sec, he was starting a PhD at Harvard at the time in about 1989, and he was heavily influenced by the researchers around him, which helped me. Okay, the CV's been given, just quickly. I've divided myself up into three things based on that. Pre-decade of the brain, decade of the brain, and post-decade of the brain. So that's basically how my professional life's actually ended up as I reflected, Victoria. I should have put Rodin up there. Okay. I graduated in 1983. I spent some time in neurophysiology at Monash University. Chiropractor, moved to Dublin with 3 kids, doubled my investment and came back with 6. While I was there, did an acupuncture diploma, did a PhD at the University of Exeter, and then did this program. And then now I do this. Okay. Interestingly enough, during that time, Ted Carrick used to take us, I did my applied neuroscience in Europe, and he used to take us around, around museums and galleries, and he was an art aficionado, loves art, and gave us a whole lot of aspects of the brain side of various types of artists and what was going on. 2002, he conducted a fabulous weekend of lectures on Van Gogh and the potential of a brain lesion he had. Well, of course, everyone's been doing that on Van Gogh. And to a degree, that changed my life. Van Gogh had what's called a subjective vertical tilt, so he actually saw the world slanted, probably, and drew it as he saw it, or painted as he saw it. Okay, Victoria and I. So Victoria's referred to me by one of my very close colleagues, Tatiana Kursova, for back pain. Okay, I said, okay, that's fine, I'll take on a back pain patient, which I normally do. Victoria and I didn't get off to a great start. Okay, 2015, it wasn't a great initial consultation, and I, in the end, said, listen, I can't help you. Okay, and just said, on your bike, basically. So I just wasn't resonating with her, and this is a point for reflection in a sec. She came back in late 2016, and she, I thought, was in a better state, but anyway, we'll talk about that in a sec. And I decided to get a handle on her. It's a bit like trying to get that, that wind, that the temperature is 20 degrees but it feels like 25, or it's 10 degrees but it feels like 6. The wind chill factor, the wind heat factor. There's an inventory which we'll talk about called the central sensitization inventory, which you can apply to people. They fill out a questionnaire and it gives you an idea of how hot they are, how hard or how high those embers are burning. She returned 71%. This was white hot. So I commenced therapy with her as far as that concerned. We had a better therapeutic resonance at the time, and I took her through a process of tactile discrimination, neuroscience education, and guided motor imagery, which are the techniques that we use. And the last treatment I had with her was in November of last year, the last time I actually saw her as a patient, and she'd had improved dramatically. She dropped her CSI considerably. We'll talk about that in more detail. Reflection time, Rodin. Here we go, look. Okay, so therapeutic coherence. I think upon reflection here that there is a great arrogance amongst therapists, okay, that we think we're the constant, okay, and we're not. And a case like this comes along with, and Victoria and the therapists here see many cases like this, and my understanding, I don't know whether it was actually Victoria was in a better place. I often reflect now at that time, maybe I also was in a better place. Sometimes people can be so far out of sync across that divide that there's just no opportunity to actually match two completely different populations, and it's never going to happen. I think when she came back, she was certainly in a better place, but probably I was too. So there we go, Victoria, I confess that we both were better at the time. Okay. Clinical science relevant to Victoria's case. Prior to 1990, basically, the brain was considered to be like a computer, just a hardwired computer. Okay, so this all changed when the decade of the brain came out. It was very clear that this wasn't the case, and we'll talk a little bit more about these particular findings now. But it was clear that there was neuroplasticity, that the people that were possibly sitting in nursing homes at the age of 80 just staring at a TV, with perhaps the workers around them genuinely thinking that nothing much else can be done, but it looks like now, right up to the day we turn our toes, we have the potential for neuroplasticity and the potential to improve every aspect of our brain function. So this is one of the big findings that came out, and there are a couple other ones which we'll talk about. So, okay, here comes the science. So sorry about this, there's a few things we have to go through here. We did say there was neuroscience, didn't we? Yes. Okay, so 4 aspects that we're going to quickly talk about, not too quickly, but enough without labouring too much. Connectivity, neuroplasticity, brain symmetry or asymmetry, and central sensitisation. The 4 areas that were really relevant to the reason why I asked Victoria to do what she's done. The brain has diverse connectivity opportunities. Okay, so it's not hard set. We connect on a task basis. So if you want to learn Spanish and you've never spoken Spanish, if you want to actually go out and hit a golf ball and you've never actually hit it, once you get out there, you are genetically wired to have different areas in your brain to actually connect. How well they connect depends on your motivation, how much you practice, obviously your health, and a whole lot of other factors. But the abilities for us to adapt to any circumstance that we find ourselves on this planet and perhaps elsewhere is fantastic. It's what makes us human. And I've said it's similar to social media. So on a task basis, we've got all these huge numbers of neurons sitting in our brain, and as soon as we get excited about something, you'll find different people connecting like a cause on social media. Okay, so these are called hubs or connectomes. And these connectomes can be hyper-connected or hypo-connected. So we have a connectomes for lots of different things in our brain, and if we really do well with them, they can become very, very well and strongly and binded together. Others, not so much. And we can also lose them as well. If you don't use them, you lose them. So we all know that. What's really important is that this is a tractography. This is now possibly the future at the moment. This is being used in research, but these are actually the canals or the tubes of axons that are running down through our brain. And this is a mathematical algorithm to give out these colours here. And this would be, for example, areas of your brain. This is the front of you, your eyes are looking this way, there's your brain stem, the back of your head here. These would be areas that would be done during a time of just sitting and gentle mind wandering, not thinking about anything in particular. Sitting, not on the phone, not on your device, just sitting, staring, watching people walk past. Not even that, just sitting and quietly reflecting. This is called the default mode network, and it's a very important area which we'll talk about in a sec. But there are other ones. Well, there we go. This is as much as I reflect. So when, around about August, after the January, Victoria asked whether she could do some of this stuff, and I said, oh yeah, okay, try this. And then she came back about August and started showing me some of these diagrams or some of these paintings that she was doing or drawings that she was doing, and it struck me straight away, because I do a little bit of work, not doing these, but actually using these in lectures. It struck me straight away that there was just a natural beauty that was, I've always thought about this, just the beauty of brain, and then straight away I just thought, wow, this is amazing. But I just often wondered where this was coming from at the time. But you know, now I have a much better idea. so embarrassed about that, but anyway. Okay. So let's look at some of these networks that are important. The pain salience network, saliency mean or salient point's an important point, a very important point. Our brains have a pain network, which is, we need to have a pain network. If something happens, if something bites us or touches us or something happens, we need to act straight away. It's a potential threat. So this here is our default mode network. This here is us now thinking about writing a lecture, and this is now a pain network. Okay, in cases like Victoria, okay, this network becomes hyper-connected. Everything is potential pain. Everything is a threat. And we'll go on a little bit more. This ends up like our social media trolls, trolling all input coming in. Anything coming in, light, sound, anything gets shunted and funneled through this pain network. So it doesn't get switched off, which can be just an awful life. So this is to satisfy me, but here are the salience networks, the default mode network, and also our anti-pain network. In our brain, we naturally produce the chemicals to inhibit pain or nullify pain. So what was very important for Victoria, that the research is suggesting that the right half of the brain, the right hemisphere, is much more active and involved in pain perception and pain interpretation and suffering. The difference between pain and suffering. It can be difficult to shut down. Any sensory input becomes a potential threat. And we have a very hyper-connected sympathetic network. And that sympathetic network can become, as Victoria said, frozen. It becomes locked in. You never shift to any other state or mode. It's just constant. Just imagine your own home the whole time is just a ghost is in there, or there's a something there, and every time you move around you're potentially perceiving that. The second big thing, and many of you here will have heard of Norman Doidge. He did work, his book was about another early researcher who looked at the ability to actually see by placing electrodes on your tongue. By stimulating your tongue, having them rewired into the vision part of the brain, blind people could actually see through stimulation on their tongue. Okay? And that's what that book was about. But basically the bottom line was that the brain grows new connections when needed. Now this is huge. This has been a huge situation in the whole area. Whether, I don't care whether it's at your local gym, now your exercise, people are telling you need to do this because you're growing stuff, your teachers, wherever it is, it's permeated society at the moment, okay? Everyone's trying to get you to grow new connections now. So, and it's a marvellous change in the way we've behaved to children and right through to the older people in our population, like me. Third one, functional brain asymmetry. The right half of the brain and the left half of the brain seem to have what we call parcellated or distinct different functions. This has been very controversial since the first guy won a Nobel Prize who cut the brain in half in intractable epileptics way back in the 50s and 60s. And it was very popularised, the right's only this and the left's only that. It doesn't quite work that way, but largely there are still dominant features of creativity, for example, is dominantly right hemisphere, a lot of contribution from left, and mathematics and so on is very dominant left with a lot of contribution from right as well. So it's not quite as parcellated or distinct as it was, but still we can assume that at the moment. Well, this was important. Right hemisphere seems to be in the research a very significant side for dominating these pain networks. And there are reasons for that which I won't go into, but there are clear, not that this is the great validating comment, but scientific reasons. High emotional activation tends to increase these pain salience networks. And you know that when people get emotionally upset or emotionally intense, pain can be a lot worse. Okay, we know that just from first principles with ourselves. Also, an active right frontal lobe, not so much emotional, but thinking, planning, worrying about children, worrying about things, worrying about your family, worrying about work, not being able to work through that in a sequential way, but that constant background buzz also tends to be very highly happening in the right side of your brain, okay, the right frontal lobe. For those who in the audience who do have more of the neuroscience background, I apologise for trying to distinguish it too definitely. It doesn't quite work that way, but it will suit this lecture. What's really important at the moment is mindfulness has become a big buzz. Now, I don't know how many of you follow the football here, but so we've seen sort of the great footballers now in AFL looking at mindfulness. We've got guys with big hulking men sitting around sort of thinking about nothing, so which is what they do anyway, as far as I'm concerned. So things haven't changed much, but the whole idea is this dampens the right hemisphere and dampens those pain salience networks. Okay, and the last thing is central sensitisation of pain. Now, what does this mean? It means that technically, if you were to put a pin and prick my hand here, I should have a normal awareness of that. It should give me alerting to the point in my hand where it is. I should be able to look down and go, that's a funnel web spider, looks like a female, and no, it should give me an opportunity to be able to look at it and make a decision about what goes on. Okay? So, and then it's over, it's finished. For people like Victoria, when she was in a bad state, we would touch that and that would echo through that system and amplify. If it was 5 units of pain or nociception, it could have been amplified to 500 units in her. And it could have lasted for days. This is typically the patients that will have manual therapy of some sort. It could be massage, it could be manipulation, it could be this, and they will be murdered for days afterwards. Yet the therapist has done what they would normally do, okay? Or you will be a therapist and hear that I went to a whatever and they climbed up onto the ceiling and jumped up and down on me, okay? So the story is fitted by that and you're thinking, goodness me, you know, but you'll know that that patient, unfortunately, things have been recreated a bit and they'll be saying the same thing about you when they walk out of your office, so you've got to be very darn careful with it, okay? So we know that that amplification is called, in the literature at the moment, central sensitisation. That's the area of research I'm involved in at the moment. We're looking at postural control mechanisms and systems in central sensitisation cases, so which is a fascinating area in itself. Well, looks like now in that research that these are the conditions that most likely can be attributed to central sensitisation. Okay? Fibromyalgia, not so much the actual arthritic side of these two things because they have definite pathological tissue change, but the pain, the constant pain, temporomandibular joint disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic non-specific low back pain, chronic neck pain. So, and I certainly don't want to put off the people who are dealing with these on an issue, but most of the people who deal with these at a chronic level, practitioners, know that there is so much involved in treating and managing these cases that you now cannot take the change in brain activity that's going on. There's a bit of horse and cart here, but at the same time, there's a very high involvement of these conditions. Victoria had received a number of these diagnoses through her time, which were valid diagnoses, and there was nothing more I was going to add to those. Things had to be a little bit different when I started with her. So my question was, when she came, was there something I could use to actually try and measure this? Is there some way of detecting the heat coming from her brain pain? And there is. This is called the Central Sensitisation Inventory. It's a type of thing that some of you might complete when you go to various practitioners, different questionnaires. This is a 25-item questionnaire. It has 5, so what's called a like-up questionnaire, and it gives you the never, rarely, sometimes, other, and they're added up, and basically it's a total out of 100. Less than 30 on this is basically insignificant. Most probably, statistically, it's been well validated you don't suffer from central sensitisation. I can stab you with a knife and you'll just say, great, okay? If you are over 40, okay, I could probably maybe just tap you with a dinner fork and you might not be very happy about it, and it might actually last. If you're over 60, I could tickle you with a feather and it feels like I've stabbed you with a knife. Okay? So just remember that. This is Victoria's original that she completed for me in late 2016 when she first came back to me. I didn't get a chance to do this in 2015. We weren't talking that well. Victoria lay on my clinic waiting room floor to start off with and sort of had to get up and off. She got in there and then just swore at me, basically, in a lovely, wasn't swearing at me, but was just using some beautiful expletives, and it was a colourful language, we'll call it. But when she came back, she was able to effing complete this as best she could, which was great. She came back with a central sensitisation of 71%, and if we remember, greater than 60. So most likely she was experiencing hyperconnected pain networks, and I wasn't going to start doing anything with her that was going to aggravate that. So I did a sensory assessment. She was hyperalgesic. In other words, everything that was touched, she had pain. Okay? So, and her history was that anyone who'd done work with her she had back pain, but I couldn't treat her back. The therapist, Tatiana, who had referred her to me, is a marvellous practitioner, and she was finding it, she was struggling. So she can stand up in the background there if you eventually, Tatiana. That's Tatiana there. So we had a lot of issues with working it out, and I sort of went back to Tatiana and said, "What are you doing? What's sending you these types of people?" But anyway, so she had poor sensory discrimination. When I said, "What does that feel like?" Victoria was going, "What the was that?" So everything was very much a threat situation. She had poor isolated movement. She couldn't walk more than about 100. She was driven by her mother. Her mother was spending time with her. She was not able. She had autonomic dysfunction. Heart rate was jumping. She had vagal upsets. Everything was going. It was very, very difficult to get her sympathetic system down. It was just, everything was ready to run, as though there was a tiger outside the room or inside the room. She'd lost her sense of self. Everything now was coming and was just white noise for her. It was very hard to discriminate. She'd lost automatic control of herself, and basically everything that touched her felt like there was a spider on her face. That's the best way I can sort of describe it to you. Okay. And I think, at that point she'd lost a sense of self. And it was very apparent to me that, even though I was in a better place, I was thinking, wow, this is just going to be... And I take on cases like this, but Victoria's was pretty special at the time because she'd bought in straight away to the neuroscience explanation I was giving to her for this. And I didn't know that she'd done medicine, and I couldn't get too many words out of it, but she was, it was a sort of quiet interaction. She went away for a month when she saw me. She was down at a holiday house, down the peninsula. When she came back, she'd bought in, she'd had think about the stuff, and she said, yeah, she'd give it a go. So we tried to shift her pain. So the way we try to do it is we try to translate I try to translate the neuroscience into some sort of individualised, tailored therapy for her. It's got to be workable. It's not the same for everybody. Sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes I can't take patients on. We've got to sneak past her highly vigilant pain salience network. Just creep in the back door, get in there somehow. I had to recognise that at the same time Victoria was undergoing some psycho-emotional counselling, and that was possibly igniting some of the pain networks that she was experiencing at the time. So she agreed to sort of lock away some of that baggage, and which she was doing. She was going very well at that time, so she did, and we moved forward. I asked her to avoid right brain information or work as much as we can, as much as you can in your daily life, but there's a few things that we make a suggestion. And where possible to use left activation. She's a very scientific girl as well, so she's one of these blessed people, and I wonder that evenness across your two hemispheres, she's got both the art side and creative side, but also has, done medicine as well. So we've got someone who's blessed across both spectrums of our societal sort of range, really, when you think about it. So, and that wasn't hard for her to do. She was fine with that. So, between 9th of the 1st 17 and 6th of the 11th 17. I did 18 further in-office sessions with her. Now that's pretty low level for those of you there, so it was over that long period of time. Practically all the work was done with her and assistants at first. Okay, she couldn't do any of the work herself to start off with. And this is the type of work we did. It's just slow, it's processed, but we worked through it. She was also receiving, I sent her off to get some work with TMJ. She had found someone else who was doing some dental work, a fabulous dentist who was able to give her some advice. She had shocking, very awful head and temporomandibular joint pain at the same time. And she did that. And we talk about decreasing this trigeminal sensory input. She had a lot of facial issues. And she was continuing with the long-standing integrated medical care that she was receiving as well. Anything else you want to add on that there? You want to jump in there?
I'm not sure where you're headed.
Yes.
But to make a point that, neuroplastic retraining requires very intensive practices. So Paul, whilst I was going in to see him at the office, once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every month, I was at home doing various exercises every day, sometimes 5 and 6 times a day. Some of them would take an hour each. I had to get my mum involved. She would have to come up or I would go down. We would spend a good hour doing this tactile desensitisation thing. So it was a major discipline and commitment.
And also, Victoria, look, because people with Victoria can find it's very hard sometimes to shift their behaviour, shift their excuses for not doing things, shift their fear about doing things. I'm pretty sure I gave you there's only 2 valid reasons not to do them. Yep. Look, I say this in jest, and sometimes it is a serious issue, I know, but those of you, the first valid reason is coma. You're in a coma. I get a call, and you're in a coma, and that's just very unfortunate. Fair enough. And the second reason is you're dead. Okay, and that's unfortunate too, but you can't do your exercises. Because people will use excuses, which is quite amazing. Great Aunt Grace came down from Mildura on the weekend. Yeah? And I couldn't do my exercises. So, yeah. So in the end, you just got to say, listen, don't waste your money. It's costly. It's costly for time, family, and all the rest of it. She bought in straight away, and she really... And so did the family, which was very important. Look, there's the inventory that she started off at 71. By April, she was 44. Still hard to shift, and she's completed one just recently, and she's 37, so she's practically down to a very functioning level at this level. Now, that doesn't define Victoria, but it also gives me an idea. If she comes back to me for treatment, I can climb up onto the roof and jump on top of her, and she won't actually complain too much. Okay, so validly I can do it now. So, reflection. I was unaware that Victoria this is a confession as well, that I was very unaware that Victoria had undertaken to follow one of the instructions I'd given her on this date, around about early, I think it might have been somewhere between, it might have been early on the piece, but it was either late December, early January, that I'd suggested that she colour by numbers. And the reason I suggested it, was to just make sure she didn't interfere with what I was giving her. That was it. We'll do something. It's task-orientated, neuroplasticity, divine it, intended to decrease her right hemisphere to try and minimise the activity of those pain salience networks. So I didn't realise that in the background this Indian was sitting there. He was creeping around the background for a year, or for 8 months, okay? And I had put very little emphasis on this. This is what I thought was happening, very... But in the background, here she was, colouring away, okay? Avidly scribbling, as her mother said, and she just kept colouring. I was talking to her mum today, and she just kept colouring. But I didn't realise she was actually doing the rest of this as well. So I'd suggested, to go back to my original slide, that she tried to do some sort of artwork therapy as I treated her. So I said...
Can I say?
Yeah.
The truth is, I said, I have to do some
She has to
homework."
do some, yeah.
And he said, "No, you can't."
That's right.
And I said, "Well, far out, this is not going to work. Can we kind of work this through?" And Paul came up with the colour by numbers. He
Yeah.
said, we were like, okay, you know, what activities and functions, parts of my brain do you want to strengthen, and what
Yeah.
do you want me to weaken? And then colour by numbers came.
Yeah, it was just a... So, look, and as she was asking, I was just thinking, don't do anything that's going to upset you. Okay, so, and can we do some sequential activity, which is very much a left temporal lobe, frontal lobe activity, which will hopefully help reset that default mode network. And she did. So, and that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. So I tried to make that a bit quicker because I thought we were running a fraction over, so I'll...
Okay, so we actually have, according to my watch, about 8 minutes.
Good, there we go.
So there will be question time later with the whole panel, but if anyone has any questions or comments to Paul, we've got just a few minutes. So
Can you give us examples of the exercises you gave her to do outside collar numbers?
Yes, please. Yes. Can I give you examples of some of the work that she was doing on my therapeutic suggestions at home?
Outside of the
Yes.
collar numbers.
Okay, so what actually happens is that when someone has very poor tactile discrimination, so if I was to touch them, it feels like pain. What we have to do is we have to set up a program where the brain knows what's going to happen, it plans it, it happens, and then it's correlated to see if it felt like it was anticipated. Okay, so Victoria will be lying on a couch or on a bed, and I will say to her, "Victoria, I'm going to touch your right little toe with this tissue paper." Victoria, repeat that. Victoria says, "You're going to touch my right little toe with this tissue paper." I touch it, and Victoria repeats it, and then I say, "Did that feel like your right toe being touched with tissue paper?" And she says, in the early days, "No." Okay, great. Okay, so we have to go through. So we remap. Now, that's light touch, deep touch with different objects. There is light pressure, deep pressure. Then we have the same non-threatening object, and then we take it through different items that she touches, that touch her. Then eventually we touch her with her eyes closed. So she now has to have no visual feedback about what's going to touch her, and this is very important at this point in pain, these recurring. So we go through that. So that was that. Then we do the same thing with guided motor imagery. So we've got to actually say, "Victoria, I'm going to move your big toe, okay, 3 times backwards and forwards. What am I going to do?" So she goes through a whole range of, it's very laborious, it's very time consuming, but by remapping every sensory stimulation to her parietal lobe, to the area of her brain that has that sensory map, that big guy, you know, the funny guy? Her map was smudged, very smudged, and she was remapping it in the same area where you would be experiencing the pain from a heart attack. Pain from your heart muscle damage is mapped in another area called your insula in your brain. So she was having everything mapped towards her limbic, what we call a limbic system, her insula, and wasn't mapping where she would normally feel it. So it's a longish process. The other instruction we give people is no matter what happens, you're not to call me, ring me, email me in the first week, okay? Because everyone feels awful, they feel sick, they feel nauseous with tissue paper touching them at home. So it's a new, novel experience, and it can be very, very, very stressful for patients to go through it. So they still ring, write, and email to me, but anyway, so that's the type of stuff. And there's a lot of other work as well. She went on to do vestibular rehabilitation. She did brainstem stabilisation stuff because, so look, there was a multiple. The reason she had a lot to do was because she had a lot of different regional problems. So I had to work out where the pain modulation areas in her brainstem were and give her exercises to specifically activate those without activating. So if I gave her an exercise and suddenly her heart rate jumped or she felt like vomiting, you've got to say, right, we've got to calm that down. So
could just ask a question around neuroplasticity. You talked about neuroplasticity being what was used to take Victoria from that space to the new learnings.
Mm.
Was it neuroplasticity that got her from her previous version of herself to that
At the back.
challenged person who was having trouble with?
I like to look at it like she had a nidus or a node. The way it's looked at these days is just like a virus that gets into a computer, okay, and just disturbs the way the normal network of that computer works. It changes things, and Victoria had a viral, not a virus in the sense of the virus that we're talking about, but a metaphorical virus that infected her brain, which she'll talk about later on, but something happened. Something happened, and it normally does. It's some sort of trauma that occurs to actually shift, and that's as probably far as I'll go on this part of the conversation. So, would it be neuroplasticity, the hyper-connected limbic network to protect her against that trauma? Yes, it is neuroplasticity. That's how we can shift, yeah, I'd imagine.